Hello out there. How's everybody doing? And welcome to the latest installment of The State of Joe. I'm your host, Joe Santiago. Now, lately, since like 2017 and a little before that, we've had a lot of discussion about UFOs, or basically in the nomenclature, they call it UAPs now instead of UFOs. Um, And there's a lot of mysteries surrounding UFOs over our existence, really, since we've been around, and there's just a lot of questions. And I'm not gonna just like. There's a lot of things that they're not telling us. Obviously, obviously there's classified information and whatnot that they don't want to tell us to panic us or whatever. But for instance, our own 33rd president of the United States, Harry S. Truman, stated, quote, "I can assure you that flying saucers, given that they exist, are not constructed by any power on earth," end quote. So there's a lot of people that talk about these things. We're learning more and more. They're giving us more information. We're just learning more about how the universe works, dimensions, traveling through space and time and whatnot. Um, and basically, you know, it leads me to think that with all these problems and national security issues coming up with these UFOs that are flying around, it's a red flag. And it's like, well, you know, why haven't we done more about it is the question. Well, the 45th Speaker of the House from 1962 to 1971, John McCormick, who was also a sergeant major in the U.S. military, said, quote, "I feel the Air Force has not been giving out all the available information on these unidentified flying objects. You cannot disregard so many impeachable sources," close quote. So a lot of people are talking about these. A lot of people in the know that know about this stuff are starting to talk. And it's unprecedented. That's unprecedented also, that's happening. Um, you know, uh, and it makes me think, well, possibly they know more. They obviously know more than they're telling us. And it's just, I'm not sure it's such a big security issue if nothing is being, no progress is being made and nothing's being done about all these flying objects and whatnot. For instance, NASA astronaut Gordon Cooper on the Mercury Atlas 9 mission and the Gemini 5 missions in the early and mid 1960s said, quote, "I believe that these ET vehicles and their crews are visiting the planet from other planets, which obviously are a little more technically advanced than we are here on Earth," close quote. And all these officials are starting to talk about it. And presidents and different people in situations. And it's just more and more seeming like they're just like, they're not telling us what's going on, because they know more than they're leading on. So the 38th president of the United States, Gerald Ford, stated on the subject, quote, "I believe the American people are entitled to more thorough explanation than has been given them by the Air Force. I think we owe it to the people to establish credibility regarding UFOs and to produce the greatest possible enlightenment on the subject. End quote. And it just keeps going. The list keeps growing of people that are saying things about this. Things are coming out now from the shadows, and people are saying things and starting to talk on this, and whistleblowers and all kinds of stuff. Former special assistant to the executive director of the CIA, Victor Marchetti, said, quote, "We have indeed been contacted, perhaps even visited, by extraterrestrial beings, and the U.S. government, in collusion with other national powers of the earth, is determined to keep this information from the general public." End quote. And lots of people have witnessed UFOs, famous people, lots of average people, tons of people have witnessed UFOs. Even our 39th president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, said about this whole subject, quote, "I am convinced that UFOs exist because I've seen one," close quote. So, going back into history, we've had a lot of stuff happen in, wars. We have nuclear, question of nuclear war now is arising again in the news, in the world today. Ukraine and Russia, is Putin gonna fire nuclear weapons like he threatened to, and said, he could hit the United States and whatnot. He's threatened about that. Well, post-World War II, former CIA director, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hellenkitter, stated in the lengthy quote, "It is time for the truth to be brought out. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly and basically they're soberly concerned about the UFOs. But through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. I urge immediate congressional action to reduce the dangers from secrecy about unidentified flying objects." End quote. And according to electronicdesign.com, another tidbit here, there are 5,784 inventions. These are inventions that people have invented, came up with, and they're being suppressed. Those 5,784 inventions are being suppressed and confiscated by the U.S., basically by the United States government secrecy orders, as of those numbers, the 5,784 inventions that have been confiscated by the United States government. That's as of September of 2018. So we have 4 more years since then. I'm sure there's been a lot more advanced inventions, not able to go on to production because the government says no, and they put a stop to it. So that's how it happens. Now, for instance, Werner von Braun was one of the top from the group of the German scientists that were brought to the US to become American scientists after World War II, okay? The US actually hired ex Nazi scientists in what was known as Operation Paperclip. Von Braun was chief architect of the Saturn V rocket for NASA's Apollo moon missions. In his deathbed confession, von Braun warned of a plot to pull off the ultimate of false flags, where he said, using reverse engineered alien reproduction vehicles to stage a fake alien invasion, Dr. Carol Rosin, former manager of Fairchild Industries, an American and aerospace manufacturing company, when Rosin met von Braun, he was in bad shape, hooked up to tubes and dying, unfortunately. Rosin was a school teacher at the time, and as he tapped on the desk and he told her, you will come to Fairchild and you will be responsible for keeping weapons out of space. He said first the Russians were the enemy against whom the US were going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified. Then identify third world country crazies. Then he would repeat, the last card, he said, is the alien card. And all of it, he said, is a lie. Close quote. Now, von Braun, he was, like I said, he was an ex-Nazi scientist, very smart guy, was involved in all kinds of stuff. And they ported all these scientists over after World War II. And because they knew all this stuff, the Nazis were working on a Bell type, they called it like a Bell or the Bell or something like that. And what it was is they have the drawings all made up for it and everything. And they were working on it. It's a reproduction spaceship, it's a reproductive thing, like he said. It's basically an alien reproduction vehicle that the Nazis were working on to fly around. It looked like a spaceship. There was a lot of them. The U.S. government had a bunch. This was all taking place. And for instance, General Douglas MacArthur said in 1955, quote, the nations of the world will have to unite, for the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets, end quote. So this, again, a lot of experts, a lot of people weighing in on this, people speaking up on this, because it's just coming to it's all rising and coming to the top now. And they're getting to a point where they can't keep this under wraps anymore. And it's just getting out, and it's crazy. Stephen M. Greer, actor, producer, and founder of the Disclosure Project, says the occupants of these flying saucers are man-made robotic systems. He says they're called programmed life forms, actually. Retired Air Force Special Agent Richard Doty said when asked about the project, he said that OSI, or Office of Special Investigations, in fact did do that. And Doty said, quote, there was a special group out of the 76th Second Intel Wing at Fort Belvoir that came out and did that. They had these people that had maybe some sort of defects, he says, anatomical defects that were brought in to fool people into thinking they were aliens. Yeah, I can't give you any specifics because the program is still classified and they're probably still doing it. I wouldn't doubt that they were still doing it. Close quote. Along with the military's so-called alien reproduction vehicles, this whole scenario would be entirely possible. Or is it all just our own experimental UFO military program being carried out on an unsuspecting civilian population? Something to think about. All this stuff, is that in fact what they're doing? They're having the spaceships we see are our own spaceships and different programs and stuff that they're doing. They're flying around to get us ready for a mock invasion where they can put these spaceships and these fake alien looking beings that are in these spaceships. They can fool us all. And why would they do that? Well, there's another that would be to unite us against another enemy or another threat, or it's all be made up and it's just fake and or whatever, and they could just be doing it. They could do it one day. The UFOs seem to be highly interested in man's arsenal of nuclear weapons also, evident in the events that took place on March 24th, 1967 at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. Captain Robert Salas recalls the incident. Early in the morning, he received a phone call from his topside security guard. He told Captain Salas that he and some other guards were observing some strange lights flying around the nuclear missile launch facility. The captain said, "Whoa, you mean UFO?" He asked. The guard didn't know what they were. The captain said, "Call me back if something more important than that happens," and hangs up. He then calls back and he's very frightened. He can tell he's shook up by the tone in his voice. He says, quote, "Sir, there's a glowing red object hovering right outside the front gate," end quote. Captain Salas then says, quote, "And as I was relating this to him, our missiles started shutting down one by one." The Air Force did an extensive investigation of the entire incident and was not able to come up with a probable cause for the shutdowns. The missiles are not connected to each other. Having a fault at one side would not affect missiles that are at another location, close quote. A total of 10 nuclear missiles were rendered inoperable after a UFO shows up. Captain Salas also says that on March 16th, 1967, 8 days earlier than the Malmstrom incident, there was the Echo flight incident, where UFOs showed up and another 10 nuclear missile silos were taken offline and rendered inoperable, again by UFOs, or UAP as they're called now. Captain Salas also speaks of a more recent episode where in 2010 at Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, when a whopping 50 Minuteman nuclear missiles mysteriously malfunctioned during UFO sightings. So they're coming around our nuclear missiles, and they've been doing it for a while, and They show up when big things happen, when wars start happening, when big decisions are made in government and stuff. They'll see these UFOs up in the sky observing, or as the Bible puts it, watch the watchers. They're watching and observing to see what we're doing, because they're worried that we're gonna destroy ourselves, basically, with these weapons, because we we shouldn't have these weapons. We shouldn't be playing with them. They're not like, you play with fire, you get burned. So, according to the NewYorkPost.com, at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California back in 1964, a former Air Force chief claimed on October 21st, 2021, he claimed that in 1964 he had witnessed a UFO firing 4 beams of light at a nuclear missile that was undergoing testing. Ex-U.S. Air Force First Lieutenant Robert Jacobs, Ph.D., said the craft resembled a flying saucer that proceeded to circle around the dummy warhead and fired the 4 beams around the missile on the top, bottom, and both sides, causing the top of the warhead to dislodge from the missile and tumble away into outer space. He was ordered never to breathe a word of what he saw. Retired Air Force Colonel Ross Dedrickson said that, quote, "The idea of any explosion in space by any Earth government was not acceptable to the extraterrestrials, and that has been demonstrated over and over." When asked how has that been demonstrated by the interviewer, the colonel answers, finishing the quote, "By the destruction of any nuclear weapons sent into space," close quote. So basically, they're on a mission to stop us from using these nuclear weapons, because there's something about nuclear weapons that is catastrophic, that is very strong, and they know about it, and they're trying to prevent us from messing with it before we destroy the whole earth and all of us and everything that God tried to set up here. So they're on a mission, you could say, from God. They're part of God's mission to, they're like God's galactic police to police us, because humans are just stupid, and they, they do these kind of things. So we have the world's first nuclear explosion, according to the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center, happened on July 16th, 1945, when a plutonium implosion device was tested at a site that is located 210 miles to the south of Los Alamos, New Mexico. This took place on the plains of the Alamogordo bombing range, known as Jornada del Muerto. The code name given for the test was Trinity. So man had successfully set off its first nuclear weapon. Then, according to Wikipedia.org, the United States detonated 1 atomic bomb over each of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the 6th and 9th of August, about 3 weeks after the first nuclear detonation test aforementioned in New Mexico. The 2 atomic bombs dropped on the Japanese cities killed between 129,000 and 226,000 people. It goes on to say that most of whom were civilians. Of course, if they did that today, be a lot more deaths, a lot more people. So that's the problem. And these 2 atomic bombs dropped by the United States is the only use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict ever in the history of man. Former British Foreign Service officer Gordon Creighton said, Quote, if you accept the bouncer dimensional theory, it's highly likely that we've done a hell of a lot of damage in somebody else's world. We might have even done more damage than we did here. A lot of these encounters do occur around these nuclear facilities, by the way. And, that's his quote. That they did more damage than they did here, but they occur around these nuclear facilities, which tells us that the visitors are concerned with our hostility towards one another. You see, with our nuclear weaponry, and the very real threat to both ourselves and to others. Now, at the time of the Roswell crash in July of 1947, which the crash actually took place according to Santa Fe New Mexican.com, happened within 30 miles of a ranching village of fewer than 170 people. And that's where the debris was found, not in Roswell, like they tell us. Corona, New Mexico, is where it was found. And Corona, New Mexico was just being overshadowed by Roswell, New Mexico. And Corona, New Mexico is about 100 miles from Roswell, which was then known at the time of the crash as Roswell Army Airfield, which later became Walker Air Force Base, also not to mention at the time of the crash and the earlier nuclear test. Roswell was the only nuclear-armed squadron in the world. Also, Santa Fe Mexican.com also says the debris was taken from Corona to the Roswell base, then the next day recanted the flying disc story, saying it was actually a weather balloon. Or it was right after the Roswell crash in July of 1947, the first test in New Mexico, basically in 1945, then the two bombings of Japan on August 6th and 9th, 3 weeks later, then all of a sudden what happens on September 18th, 1947? The government splits the Army from the Air Force and creates the Air Force as a separate branch away from the Army. They used to be connected. And on that day, the government created also the CIA. While the coronavirus has been taking place that we've been dealing with, we've been getting all this UFO information, okay, from the Navy, Air Force, and Pentagon, and possible national security threat, all stemming from the most popular UFO event in the world that took place in Corona, New Mexico, not in Roswell, as they say, you see. And all these revelations happened during the 70th anniversary of Roswell. In 2017, before the coronavirus kicked in, then it was, and still is today, more and more than ever, all aliens all the time. So during the, you had the crash, which took place in Corona, New Mexico, not Roswell, as they've said. Well, now we've come up to the 70th anniversary. 2017, we start, during the coronavirus, we start getting more stories and leaks, and all this information starts flooding in on aliens. We got that, which they say was a visitor, could have been a probe or a spaceship, because it flew out, it actually accelerated and stuff and did all this stuff it shouldn't have done, called Oumuamua, which means scout in Hawaiian. And, they found that and discovered it, and they saw that it was coming out and stuff. And basically, yeah. And so during the coronavirus, you have that the first major crash after all those nuclear tests happened in Corona, New Mexico, which they said Roswell, but it's really happened in Corona. So the coronavirus taking place, all this information about what happened in Corona, New Mexico. You see the synchronization and all the, it's just, it's creepy, and it's weird. And so also the former president of the Soviet Union, which is now modern day Russia, Mikhail Gorbachev, said about UFOs, or now known as UAPs, quote, "The phenomenon of UFOs does exist, and it must be treated seriously," end quote. Then we have our 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, which 40 is a significant number in the Bible too. 40 days, it rained 40 days and 40 nights in the flood. There's all kinds of mentions of the number 40 in different numbers in the Bible, but 40 is a big one. Our 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, at a September of 1987 address to the United Nations General Assembly, said on the matter, quote, "In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?" Close quote. So we have all this stuff going on. It's just total insanity. We've come to this point in human history. Now, in the Holy Bible, I'm reciting the King James Version. Revelation chapter 8, we read verses 10 and 11, read as follows. "And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters." Verse 11 reads, "And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters, because they were made bitter." Well, you hear those verses and you think, okay, it is referring to a falling star or a meteor. But if man used to live on Mars, okay, and there was a giant, say, type of nuclear war on Mars, which left the planet red, and the fallen angels, or Nephilim, saw a window to thwart God's plan to stop God's most treasured creation, man, and man's fall was a literal fall from the planet Mars to Earth, then maybe some evil fallen angels or aliens, okay, are the originators of these destructive nuclear weapons. So they were maybe originated in space, and they were controlled, but then man got a hold of them and figured out the formula Einstein and everybody else, and how to split the atom. And that goes back to the Bible again. Adam, the first man in the Bible, Adam and Eve, split the atom. Okay. Everything goes back to the Bible, and it's just the way it is, and you just have to decipher it and figure it out. But so basically, are they the originators of these destructive nuclear weapons? Then that would explain the good aliens coming to Earth to keep us in check with nuclear weapons after we started using them on Earth, just like when angels came and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah with a nuclear type blast. In the Bible story of Abraham, Lot, and Lot's wife, well, here's the thing. On Saturday, April 26th, 1986, a reactor of the nuclear power station called Chernobyl exploded and did release radiation that drifted across northern Europe, affecting the inhabitants and food grown in the entire area. And they covered the damaged reactor with millions of tons of cement. I don't see how that's going to solve the problem. You're just going to fill it in and it's going to spread everywhere and go everywhere, stay there, to seal it off. Well, then the reactor was in at that time, then the reactor was in northern Ukraine. It was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics controlled area then. Fast forward to 2022, today, the Russians were actually shelling the Chernobyl nuclear plant at one point during the war, which in a dictionary, the Ukrainian word for wormwood, which the scripture said, it would star fall from heaven, its name would be wormwood. Okay? Well, the Ukrainian word for wormwood, a bitter wild herb used as a tonic in rural Russia. Well, the Ukrainian word for wormwood is Chernobyl, the name of the nuclear power station that the reactor exploded in 1986. Now, this is just crazy coincidences, and I don't, if you can deny this as much as you want, I'm sorry, this is synchronistic. This is all God's plan. This is God's, it's crazy, and it's, he lets us do these things. We have free will, so we can do these things. So basically, call it coincidence, chance, or synchronicity, or basically God's plan. Either way, these uncanny connections keep popping up, drawing conclusions and connecting dots to biblical prophecy, human history, and the huge part words and definitions and metaphors mean to our ongoing survival as a species and